So there we go. And welcome everyone to week 2 for MPD. So in tonight's session, we'll kind of go over what you need to do this week for the projects. Well, basically the project 2. Also, real quickly, we'll touch on the discussion board. And then finally, too, I want to give you some examples as well as to what some other students did in previous months for project 2, just to kind of show you what we're looking for and how you can score well. So the first thing to say is, of course, remember, just like usual, remember everybody's on mute now, right now. So if you have anything to ask or anything, just go ahead and use that chat board, and we'll be sure to watch that. So for the online students this week, you may have already noticed, some of you have already posted, the discussion this week is just to look at what you guys are basically to be doing for project 2, which is either one of the following, either a film treatment, a press kit, a game design document. Actually, what you're going to be doing for project 2 is what we call a game treatment, not a whole game design document, or a book proposal. Okay, and for the discussion this week, you can take a look here at the questions here, but basically the format is the same. Just make sure to do an initial post by tomorrow night, 11:59, and then also a response post by Sunday. And just the topic this week is just to discuss basically what, in your opinion, makes for a good book proposal, game treatment, press kit, film treatment, etc. What are some of the details that you would look for if you were an agent? What are some of the things that separate, the good ones from the not so good ones? So, like, for example, what I said this week in a discussion is that, in my opinion, I think one of the big things that makes a difference is the amount of detail that you can include in it. Because if you just have something simple, just a basic explanation, let's just say that you're doing a book proposal, and you just have kind of just a basic explanation of what the book is about without a lot of detail, that's really not going to capture the agent's imagination, or it's not really going to grab their attention. They're not really going to be uh, as knowledgeable as they should about your project, right? That's going to be one of the things that they're going to be looking for, is how much can you explain about your project, right? And of course, some other things that separate the good ones from the not so good ones would be, the amount of typos that you have, how professional you are in your tone, etc. Right? Also, another big thing, it goes without saying, but one of the fundamental things that sometimes people forget about is not following instructions. Right? Sometimes agents will say, for example, "Hey, just give me a one-page synopsis of your book proposal." Right? You don't have to send me the entire 15-page treatment that you have or proposal that you have. Just send me a one-page synopsis. And then what do people do? They don't pay attention to the instructions, what the agent is looking for, and instead they go ahead and send them their 15-page description. That right off the bat, right off the top, is going to tell the agent, hey, this person's not even following instructions. So if they're not going to follow instructions to a simple treatment or a proposal, then it shows you that they're not really paying attention, right? So those are just some of the things I think that kind of separate the good treatments and book proposals and game treatments and press kits, etc., from the ones that kind of get, you know, thrown in the garbage, in other words. So that's just your discussion this week, is just to talk a little bit about that. Also, make sure, just as an announcement too, Clovis, I know, mentioned that in last week's discussion, he had some kind of leftover questions, or he wanted to get some other responses, and the discussion board closed. So I think that you guys may have been able to see that there's also an open discussion forum that we put in this week, so the discussion can continue there. So in other words, if the discussion for a given week kind of closes by that Sunday, and you want to continue that, or if there's some questions that you guys want to keep going back and forth to, just feel free to use that student lounge, we call it, or that open discussion forum. So that's what you have to do this week for the discussion. Same policies as usual. Make sure to have 2 postings in to get the full credit. I noticed that, not for this class, but I noticed that the mastery class of last week, there were a lot of people that just didn't get that for some reason. They just didn't follow instructions, and they couldn't get the full credit. But of course, that's a different class. But I just wanted to remind you, to get the full credit, you need to post twice in the discussion boards. And so this week, what we're going to do here is look specifically at Project 2. Now, I probably mentioned this last week, but it's worth reiterating. okay, that in the real life, if you look at a film treatment, or if you go on those guidebooks that we showed you last week, the Guide to Literary Agents, or the Songwriters Market, or the Writers Market, or if you find a list of film sales agents on IMDb Pro, etc., and they ask you to write kind of like, let's just say, for example, a film treatment, or in the book industry they tell you to write a book proposal. In real life, just keep in mind that every agent is probably going to be a little bit different, and I know that's unfortunate. That's kind of something that's very, very annoying for us writers, right? But it's something that we have to deal with. Some agents just want like a one paragraph synopsis. Other agents want a full 20-page treatment. And unfortunately, you kind of have to adapt to the agent that you are querying, right? You have to kind of do what they say, in other words. And that can be very frustrating, because if you're trying to pitch to like 5 agents at a time, 5 agents a day, and then the next day you find 5 more agents, and it's annoying because you have to kind of adjust your treatment or your synopsis or whatever it might be to each individual agent. But unfortunately, that's part of the real world. That's part of the industry. But that being said, for the purposes of this class, what you guys need to do for project 2 is just follow the templates that we're going to go over right now that are in the appendix of the textbook, actually. And these are very basic, sort of generic templates that you can follow. Don't get too fancy. You don't have to do anything more than what we give you in these templates. You certainly can if you want. Like, I know that some people might have like a film treatment in real life that they're using for the projects and they want feedback on that. That's fine, but you don't really have to get into like financials and stuff like that for this. Just go ahead and follow these treatments that we're going to go over right now, and you'll be fine. Okay, for the purposes of this assignment. Remember, in real life, it might be different. You have to kind of make adjustments here and there, but just for the purposes of project 2, just make sure to follow these templates that we're going to give you right now. Okay, so the first one, and I'm going right from the textbook here, by the way, it starts on page 94 of the textbook. And let's blow this up a tad. Let's go to like one there, blow this up a tad there so it makes it easier to see. And so the first one we'll go over is a film treatment. Now, this comes right from an article from Carol Clues, and she's got an article called How to Write a Film Treatment, and this is just a literal cut and paste from that segment here. And basically, what you need to do is just follow this template. Okay, so the first thing that you have to do here, and as it says here, of course, a treatment, if you're not familiar with what a treatment is, it's basically just kind of a synopsis of your story. So it's like what happens in the beginning of the film, and then you follow it kind of scene by scene, or maybe not literal scene by scene, but pretty much plot point by plot point, from what happens in the beginning to what happens at the end. And you need a cover page for this. Technically speaking, it's not a huge deal for the purposes of our class, um, but if you can try to follow this to a T, you should have a cover page, and at the top and center it should say film treatment, and it should be in bold and 14-point fonts. I mean, if you sway from this a little bit, it's okay, but try to have this or try to follow this as much as possible. And then in the center, you would also have the title, and it should be bold and in larger font depending on how long the title is. And then, okay, here's something that I have to talk about here. Let's take a time out here for a second. Okay, for the purposes of this assignment, you see here what's highlighted here. Register your script with the Writers Guild, or if you want to have a copyright. Um, for the purposes of this assignment, okay, put in the registration number. Now, obviously, this can be hypothetical. You don't have to do this for real. You don't have to register your script with the Writers Guild, or you don't have to have a copyright. You don't have to go through the copyright office for this assignment, okay? So for that being said, you can make that number up, right? You can be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or copyright number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, here's a couple of real life lessons that I've learned about recently. In real life, if you do this, I'm not talking about this assignment, okay? But in real life, if you do this, what I've I've been told by everybody now in the industry, that you really should not put any kind of registration number, copyright number on your treatments, okay? The reason for that, it's a long explanation, but the reason for that, more or less, a kind of a short version of that explanation, is basically it just kind of looks like you're being paranoid, that you're looking to sue people, and it just kind of, for more or less, it kind of spells out the word amateur. Okay, so in real life, you don't necessarily have to put the registration number in. In fact, they're saying that they say that you should definitely register your script with the Copyright Office, right? You should protect yourself, but you don't need to advertise that it's copyrighted. They're just going to assume that it is, and so if you do this in real life, you don't necessarily have to put that, right? But for the purposes of this assignment, just go ahead so that we know that you understand the importance of registering your script with the Copyright Office or the Writers Guild of America. Just put in that number, just for the purposes of this assignment, so that we know that you need to protect yourself, right? Now, but that being said, if you do send this to an agent in real life, you wouldn't want to put that in there. That's just kind of, it's confusing, but you need to do it for this assignment so that we know that to protect yourself, if that makes sense. The other real quick thing here to note, and this is actually covered in your textbook in chapters, between chapters 11 and 17, when Kim talks about licensing and things like that. Just so you know, this is just for those of you that are doing this in real life. And what you need to know is that you do not need to register your script with the Writers Guild of America. It gives you zero protection. Okay, this is another thing that I'm finding out talking to more people in industry that know about this. Repeat, registering your script with the Writers Guild of America. You know, you go on there and I think it's like $20. If you're a student, it might be like $15. It's good. It can't hurt to register your script, but in terms of protecting yourself, it doesn't give you any copyright protection whatsoever. For copyright protection, you actually need to go through the Copyright Office. The U.S. Just do a Google search on like U.S. Copyright Office, and you can find it on there. And you can register your script. It's like $35. That is what gives you protection. So if somebody steals your work, you can sue them. Okay. So I don't want to say that the registering your script with the Writers Guild of America is pointless, but in terms of protecting yourself, it's not going to give you the protection. It's not going to guarantee protection, put it that way. Whereas if you register your screenplay with the Copyright Office, it does give you protection, and you can sue somebody in federal court. So those are just a couple of FYIs that you should know if you do this in real life. Okay. But let's get back to the project itself here. Okay. So sorry for that kind of tangent a little bit, but I wanted to tell you that because it is important for those of you that are doing this stuff for real, okay? Or even if you're going to do this for real later. So for project 2, you, after the cover page, you need to have a table of contents. You need to list your author bio. It doesn't have to be terribly long, but just a little bit of information about yourself. A cast of characters. You don't have to list every single character that's in the story, but at least the main characters, put it that way. You need to put the locations down. The reason why that is important is because the agent, and by extension the producer and the set designer, needs to know this before beginning the project, because they're going to need to know what kind of sets they need to build. They need to know how much is this going to cost. In other words, is this going to be something that takes place in outer space, which with maybe has a lot of special effects, lots of fancy locations, something like a fantasy story like Lord of the Rings, where it's going to be shot in some, like fantasy type of location or environment? Or is this going to be like Office Space, where it just takes place in a simple office, things like that? So that's why locations is important. Once again, you don't have to put every single location in every single scene, but just like the main locations where it takes place. And then you would have the treatment itself, right? So after you do the biography, the cast of characters, um, and the locations, you would have, and by the way, this will give you just a simple kind of sample. Um, Here we go. Okay, so here's a sample character description, right? Sharon McCoy is a bright and sometimes outspoken accountant. She has a sense of humor and a pleasant personality. Her world is shaken when she discovers a devastating secret, and blah, 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 right? Just a brief description of the characters, right? So then in terms of locations, just another sample here, like office settings. One large office has many desks and workers with computers. A psychiatrist's office would have lots of leather furniture, file cabinets, and a desk, etc., etc. And then the treatment itself. Um, Actually, before you even begin the treatment, where you lay out like the first scene, you would have something that's called countermeasures. This is just basically just a simple, what's the conflict of the story, and what do the characters have to do in order to counter the obstacles that they face, right? Just a short description of that. And then you would have the treatment itself. Once again, for this class, we don't expect you to have like a fully written screenplay. You might not even know exactly what's going to happen in your story 100%. That's okay, but at least explain just what happens from beginning to end as much as you know about it, right? So you don't necessarily have to break things into like first scene, second scene, third scene, fourth scene, and go all the way up to like 45 or 50 scenes. By the way, those of you that are interested in screenwriting, there's an excellent book out there called Save the Cat. I know it's an awkward title, but it's called Save the Cat. And it's written by a guy named Blake Snyder. And it's a pretty good book, almost like a textbook, if you will, in terms of how to go about writing your story. And, anyways, one of the things that he says is that every good story, not every good story, but most stories that you see, like most movies that when you go to the theater and you see a movie, or most movies that you see on TV, most movies have about what he says 40 plot points. In other words, that doesn't necessarily mean 40 scenes, but 40 like plot points, like 40 things that happen. Now, obviously, since you don't have your whole screenplay necessarily written, you don't have to have like 40 different scenes or anything like that. But you could, even if you want to break things up into the three acts, because most stories have three acts, right? The beginning act, the middle act, and the final act, right? Um, if you want to break it up that way, that's fine. But just like I said, tell us what happens in the story. Tell us, but by extension, tell the agent what happens in the story from beginning to end, right? And like I said, the more detail, the better usually. Like you don't want to get into, like, probably people ask us, all the time, well, how long should your treatment be? Well, the answer is, if you do all of this, right? If you have your author bio, you have your cast of characters, you have your locations, and then the treatment itself, well, these things tend to come into, we'll say, like, I don't know, 4 to 7 pages or something like that. But there is no minimum or maximum for this project, right? You don't have to get to like a certain minimum, or there's no like maximum you can go up to. You can go as long as you want. But we tend to say that the average tends to be about, I don't know, like I said, 4 or 5 pages or something like that. And what you want to do is you want to avoid giving us, I mean, the agent, you want to avoid giving the agent just like a kind of a 1 page synopsis. Well, it is true sometimes that's all the agent will want, but for this treatment that you're doing, you need to come up with, generally, we'll say like 4 to 5 pages usually. And then like later on, if you get to a point where you're sending this to agents and they just want like a 1 page synopsis, well, first of all, that's hard to do for a feature length film. But secondly, if you do, you just need to figure out a way to condense it, right? Here, you're not necessarily trying to do that. You're trying to tell as much detail as you can. So that's how you would do a film treatment. So before I go on, let's show you an example here of a student from a previous month. Here, let me go. And we'll take a look here. Here's a film treatment example. So here's from a student. It's called "Help Me Entertain My Kids," right? Kind of a awkward title. And they have registered with the Writers Guild of America, registration number. Once again, in real life, you wouldn't necessarily put this on there, but for the purposes of this assignment, you need to put, even if you make up the number, that's fine, right? You have a table of contents with the sections that we just went over, right? Author bio, cast of characters, locations, treatment. Let me blow this up a little bit here so it makes it easier to see. And author bio, right? I took out their name here, but you can see blah, 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 born and raised in Miami, Florida. They've loved the art of television and film for as long as you can remember, and so on and so forth. You don't really have to provide this lengthy of a bio. This person goes on for like over a page, not necessary. Um, but just a short paragraph, a brief paragraph telling us a little bit about yourself. Also, cast of characters, right? So in this case, he lists the characters. This is, he lists the demographics, right? This character is male, 42 years old, and he explains a brief description of this character, right? Next character, same thing. Next character, same thing. I can't remember offhand. I don't remember the story. I don't remember if this was supposed to be a documentary. No, I don't think so. Okay, anyways. So this student only lists about 3 characters. Ideally, you should probably have more than that, I would think. You might just have like 2 or 3 main characters, but you might want to put in a couple of extra like kind of supporting characters and just a brief description. Locations. Now, this student, they could have been a little bit more elaborate here. Now, he says that establishing scenes will take place in an upscale 5-bedroom apartments, and there will be an establishing scenes in a renovated colonial cottage in historic Virginia. And okay, so this is a pretty good paragraph in terms of describing some locations, but you could even do more of kind of a bullet point thing, just like he did up here, right, where he lists a character and then a brief description. You could do the same thing here for some of the locations as well, but that's okay, right? Then the synopsis itself, right? He starts out with the countermeasures, right? We won't go through the content here, but you kind of see that just a brief synopsis. If we go back here to what this is, we would call this maybe countermeasures here, right? What's the main conflict of the story? What do the characters face? And then he goes into an act by act description, right? Now this is pretty long. And by the way, if you're familiar with screenwriting, you know that usually the way that screenwriting goes is usually Act 1 tends to be short. Act 2 tends to be the longest segment of a screenplay, and the third act tends to be short as well. So it goes kind of short, long, short, if that makes sense. And that's kind of the way the story is set up. Act 1 is a little bit long, but that's okay, right? But basically, though, in this description, though, he's just kind of explaining what happens from beginning to end in the film, right? And that's all you have to do for those of you on the film team, right? So let's look here at television, because television falls underneath the umbrella of film. Now, same type of thing. It's very, very similar. Just follow this format that we give you here that starts on page 96, right? And what you want to have here is very similar. You would have the author name, the title of the show, what type of genre is the show, right? So the format. You would have the logline description, just a 1 or 2 sentence. Sometimes it can be 3 sentences. A description of what the show is about. And then you would have the treatment itself. I'll show you an example of this here in a second, but this is just a sample one that we found. You can see here the author name. Well, you wouldn't put available upon request. You would want to put your name there. The genre for this show is a reality show. The title is Broadway Bound. They have a brief description logline, right? 2 to 3 sentence description of, in this case, it's Waiting for Guffman meets American Idol. That's kind of a funny 1 sentence description of what the show is about, but sometimes that works, right? And then a synopsis. Now, here's the thing. The synopsis in general, just it's very similar to what we set up here with the TV treatment with the countermeasures. Just what is the show about? What's the main conflict? It can be 3 to 7 paragraphs. Now, in this example, we cut this a little bit short here, but you can see here what the student does, or what this example does, is it just kind of shows like what's the main conflict of the story, what's the synopsis, what is the show about. I mean, obviously, every episode is going to be different. Every episode is oftentimes going to be a standalone episode. But in general, if you were to describe the series, how would you describe it? What's the main conflict? Now, here's the thing too. For Project 2, if you're on the TV team, you really only need to describe the first 7 episodes. Now, every single show, you guys are familiar in real life, every single show has a different episode count, right? I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Breaking Bad, at least the first season, was only like 7 episodes, right? Whereas you can't, in like, shows like The Sopranos were 12 episodes per season. Season 6 ended up being a 2-part episode or series or season, but then you go and you look at some of the shows in the 1990s, like Beverly Hills 90210 had something ridiculous like 28 episodes per season. So every show is going to be a little bit different, right? That's okay. But for the purposes of this assignment, all you need to do is break down the first 7 episodes for those of you on TV, right? You could do more if you want, but try to have at least what happens in the first 7 episodes, right? And just kind of give us a brief synopsis. Just like those of you on the film team, if we go back up here, look at this, like they were kind of breaking things down into like perhaps acts, like what happens per act. Here we're doing the same type of thing, only it's not broken down into like 3 acts, or it's not broken down into scenes, but it's broken down into 7 episodes, right? Now here, if you look at this, these are a little bit short. Ideally, you would want to have just a little bit of more information per episode, right? More like the first 2, right? Okay, so that's what you guys have to do for those of you on Team TV. So let's look here at a TV treatment example, right? This is for show proposal. This is actually the treatment for the query letter that we looked at last week, or one of the query letters we looked at last week, right? So this is an example from last month or the month before, and this is a TV treatment, and you can see here the genre is a reality show. The title is The Unfortunate Get Fortunate. Then she has the log line, what would happen. And by the way, this didn't get a perfect score. She has some typos here, so just ignore those. But basically the log line is what would happen if a homeless person living on the streets decided, or what would they do for 24 hours if there were no limits in fulfilling their dream. Listen to their stories. And then she has a synopsis. And then she lists episodes 1 through 7, right? So she goes through and explains, okay, here's what we're going to do for episode 1. Here's what we're going to do for episode 2 and 3 and 4 and so on, right? All the way to the first 7 episodes. Now for her show, what she's doing here, since this is a reality show and every episode has its own unique protagonist, if you will, because they use a different person for each episode. So that's what she's doing here. But in any case, though, she's just explaining, okay, what happens in the first 7 episodes, right? Now she actually lists budget. She says 2 million for a season of. You don't have to necessarily get into budget projections and things like that. That's something that's more of what a producer would do. If they take you on, if they're interested in your project, if they're interested in your show, that's the producer's job, is to look at each episode and then figure out the money projections and the talent, the cost for talent and things like that. You don't really have to worry about budgeting and things like that. The location, again, that's something you can make suggestions, but that's more of what the producer would do, right? And then personalities, again, that this is more of the producer's job, is to look at talent. Now, certainly though, if you're pitching this idea for the show, and very often if you're writing the treatment for a show or for a film, you're going to be asked to get some type of producer credit. So you can put some of the stuff in there if you want, if you envision yourself as a producer, but it's not required for this assignment. Okay, so that's what you guys need to do for those of you on Team TV, right? So it's very similar to film in the sense that you're doing a treatment. Okay, next, let's look at game. Those of you on the game team. Now, I don't think we have anybody in class that's on the game team, but for those of you that might be online and you're listening to this, let's look at what you need to do. Now, for those of you on games, what your assignment is slightly different than the other teams in the sense that your template, your quote unquote template, you have a lot more freedom with it than the other groups. Like those of you on TV, you kind of have to follow this pretty closely, right? You have to have the first 7 episodes. Those of you on Team Film, you have to follow this template that we give you pretty closely. Games is a little bit different because in real life, and those of you that are on Team Games, if you do this for real, what you're going to be asked to do is what's called a game design document. But the problem with that is that game design documents, if you ever see one of these things in real life, these things are very, very extensive. We're talking 60 to 100 pages most of the time. Now, obviously, we're not going to ask you to do a game design document for this class, right? In fact, they require all these different types of things where you have to give, well, what you see here on the screen, right? You have to have an overview. You have to go through and provide basic concept, background story, tone, objective, gameplay, You have to get into graphics. You have to get into the computer science and explain technical terms and things like that. And usually, one of the things to note is that if you do this for real, a game design document is in most cases not put together by just one person, right? Usually it's a team of people. So you have people that are on the technical side, you have people that are in the creative side, you have people that are on the marketing side, and they all kind of come together to put this game design document together. Now you are not working in teams, obviously. So those of you that are on team games, what we're going to tell you to do here is just to work by yourself, obviously, but you don't have to go into as much detail as is on here for this listing of a game design document, okay? Your assignment is basically to come up with a treatment very similar to what we just looked at with film, meaning that you do have to establish, okay, first of all, you probably do want to have at least a section that explains who you are, right? Author bio, explain your credibility. You probably do want to have a section that lists what the primary goals of the game are. You want to list like the background story. Now, some games simply don't have a background story, but some games do, right? Like The Legend of Zelda has a background story. Um, Prince of Persia has a background story. Games like, I don't know, Tomb Raider. I never played that, but I'm sure that probably has some kind of background story. So some games have a background story. If that's the case and that applies to your game, you would want to explain that, right? Then you want to include, you don't have to, but if you do want to include screenshots of what your game would look like, if you want to create like storyboards, you can. It's not required. Um, but you do want to explain things like what's the basic concept of the game, what's the high concept of the game. That's kind of like the log line of your game. Like what's the goal, what's the appeal of your game, what's the elevator pitch of your game. Basically, that's what we're looking for with the high concept. So background story, if applicable, as well. What's the tone? What's the narrative? I guess maybe provide information about like who's the audience. So the tone of the game, is this for like little kids perhaps that might play this on the Nintendo Wii U? And that's not a knock against Nintendo, but a lot of their games are geared specifically for younger audiences, and the graphics are purposely not sophisticated, right? If that's the case with your game, then you want to explain that. Or the opposite spectrum, you could have a game that's highly sophisticated, very detailed, very realistic looking, and that the tone might be adult in nature, right? It might be a game that's rated MA, right, by the ESRB. So what's the narrative of the game? What's the heart of the story? Is this a linear story, right? Sometimes games are simply beat levels 1 through 16, right? But other games are not like that. Sometimes they're circular. Sometimes the worlds that you go to are dependent on the ones that you choose, right? The order that you choose. So sometimes games are not linear, right? What's the objective of the game? Sometimes the objective is simply to get the most points. Sometimes the objective is to rescue the princess. Sometimes the objective is just to, in a sports game, just beat the opponent, right? Um, Talk about the gameplay itself. Talk about, I'm not sure, I know it's on here somewhere, but you would want to talk about, like, is this game going to be an online game? Like, in other words, can people play with people that online? Or is this going to be just a single player game? Is this going to be a game where, like a game like GoldenEye, right, for the N64? This is going way back in the day, but for the N64, where there's a one player mode, but one of the appeals of that game is also the multiplayer mode, right? Is this a game like that? What's the gameplay like? Um, Talk about artificial intelligence. What's the planned interface? Is this going to be for like the PS4, the Xbox One, the Nintendo Wii U, etc.? Or is this going to be a PC game? Or is this going to be maybe all the above? Is this going to be a game for the handheld devices? Things like that, right? What's the interactive structure? Are there chapters, levels, things like that? Multiplayer, difficulty, right? Is this a game? This kind of goes back to like who is the game for, but is this a game for adults that is going to take a long time to beat, right? Or is this a game for kids that that it's going to be a pretty easy game? Or is the difficulty level adjustable, right? Then other aspects of the game, talk about the characters, talk about, well, sometimes, not all the time, this won't apply to you, but I mean, Sometimes are you going to need like license exploitation? Is this going to be based on like something else, like a movie or a book or something like that? Um, Controls. Talk about the controls. Is this going to be a game that uses all of the controls on the controller for the PS4, or is this going to be a game that just uses a couple of them, right? And graphics, once again, you can include screenshots if you want to. It's not required. Um, but also, when we say screenshots, I should also mention this too, that even if you have like sketches of what the screen would look like, because obviously sometimes you have ideas in your mind, but you can't put those into a computer screen just yet. So if you have sketches, then that's fine. I mean, just obviously make sure that they're professional looking. Don't just like pick up a piece of paper and draw like stick figures or something like that, right? But if you have sketches, because some of you I know are very talented artists, if you want to include those, that's fine. Also, sounds and music. And so you get the point. But let me go back to my original thing that I said before I started this explanation, is that for those of you on the game team, though, the way that you organize this little treatment here is kind of up to you. You have a little bit more freedom in the sense that you don't have to follow every single thing that's on here to a T the way that the other teams do. But still, my original point, though, it stands, which is that the more detail that you can provide for the agent, or the developer, whoever you're writing the query letter to, the better you're probably going to score in this assignment, and the better chance you're going to get for the agent or the developer to take you on and to say, hey, I trust this person. Let's adapt their ideas, right? So let me show you an example of what this would look like for those of you on team games here. Let's look here at a game treatment here. If we go to right here, okay, this is not a perfect example, but this is pretty good here. Let me load this up. Now, so this student actually has their logo for the game, or I guess this could even be like a business card. That, again, not necessary, but nonetheless, this student lists the game. Now, technically speaking, you would want to put titles in italics, so it should be this here. But now this game is for the iOS and the Android. So this isn't like a type of game that could be necessarily on the PS4 or something like that. But nonetheless, though, the student is explaining what the game is for. He goes into detail about how to play the game. He talks about, okay, there's multiple screens that the user needs to be aware of, and then he goes into details about those. And then he talks about the social platform aspects of the game, the description of the game, like what's the overall concept. So it's good, by the way, if you even want to bring in comparisons with other games, right? So in this case, he's comparing it to, it's kind of like Mario Party, okay? Okay, that's good, because at least the agent or the developer who he's writing this to is going to know like what is a comparable game, like what is the game like. So it gives them an idea already in their mind of what this game is like, right? Then he talks about the background story. He talks about the tone of the game. He describes it as one of self-exploration and discovery set in a futuristic sci-fi environment. Okay, I mean that's a pretty good description of tone, right? Then narrative, like what happens here. Then he explains the heart of the gameplay. Then he goes into the objective. In this case, it's just to grow your avatar from the birth of a star through to creating the user's own offspring stars on a path to becoming a galaxy. Talks about the gameplay. And he says it varies between mini games, but will have a consistent theme and end goal of furthering the user's level through successful completion. Then he discusses the AI, right? In this case, he says that there will be no AI used from the standpoint of opposition during the minigame. Instead, intelligence will be gathered regarding actual gameplay. But then he does describe, though, other things like touch interface, the first-person view for all the minigame sections, and so on and so forth, right? Other aspects, he talks about characters, multiplayer options, game worlds, the controls, etc., on-screen options, menus, and so you get the idea. I mean, he talks about graphics, sound and music, etc. So in other words, if we just go back to this template, though, you can see here that he basically goes through a lot of what is described here through pages 98 through 101, right? So there's no set template to follow, but you could see here that he does a pretty good job of going through a lot of these things here that are listed, right? So I hope that kind of clarifies things for those of you on team games. Okay, moving on here. If we go to the next part, okay, which is book proposal. Now, the book proposal template that we give you is something that you can use if you're writing a fiction book or nonfiction. Both of them will use this exact template, okay? And as with the other projects, you can see a lot of these things overlap or are very similar, right? So with the book proposal, the first thing you want to do is describe an overview of the book. So like one of the ways to look at that would be like, if you pick up a book and let's just see here. The overview might be something, as it says here, 2 or 3 paragraphs. It can be a little bit longer than that, but what would go kind of on the back cover of the book? So you know how you pick up a book, and a lot of times there is most books, not all, not all books, but in most books, there's kind of a brief description of like what is the plot is about, or on the inside flap, in the outside flap, or on the back cover. Just kind of think of that as kind of like, what is the book about? What's the big selling point? You don't want to give away any spoilers. Don't want to give any uh, information about what happens at the end, right? You don't want to give away the ending, but it's just kind of in a ways to entice the reader, right? So just kind of an overview. Then you want to explain target audience, right? Who the target audience is. Now keep in mind, you might have more than one audience. You might have a core audience, but then you might have some secondary audiences as well, right? And you want to explain, okay, not just who they are, but information about them, perhaps demographic information, things like how old they are, gender, and you could also include psychographic information. What are their likes and dislikes? What types of personalities do they have? You don't have to go so far as a diagnosis for personalities, but or personality behaviors, but just some general description about like how do you think those people, or who do you think they are, and how do they think? In other words, right? Then, once again, just a little bit of information about yourself, about the author. So talk about your education, your experience, your background, your credentials, things like that. Next is competitive titles. Now, with this section, just be a little bit careful in terms of how you go about explaining this. What I mean by that is, like, let's say that you're doing a book that is that's a children's book or something like that. Well, a competitive title would not be like Harry Potter, right? Because your chances are, especially as a new author, which pretty much most people are going to be as you're going into this process, your competitor is not going to be J.K. Rowling, right? It's very similar to like sometimes in our final business plan presentations that we have here in EBMS. Sometimes students that are going to start a band, sometimes they'll say that their competitors are like Green Day and stuff like that. It's like, no, you're not going to be competing with Green Day to start out with, okay? Um, that's not to say that your subject material might be, completely different, but just with your competitive titles, you want to have something that's more kind of grounded to your level, because you're not going to sell the agent by saying that your competitor is J.K. Rowling. Okay, now if there is something though that is comparable to what you're doing, you want to first of all explain that this is your competitor, but also explain that your book is unique. In other words, what separates your book from the competitors, right? Um, Now, but though, let me go back to what I just said though about how your competitor would not be J.K. Rowling. There is a way to word this though, something like that, to where it can be an advantage. So what I mean by that is in this section where competitive titles, let's just say again, just to be hypothetical, let's just say that you're doing a children's book about magic, right? Well, you wouldn't say directly that your competitor is J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter or something like that, but you can word it to say that because even though J.K. Rowling is not a competitor, The wild success of her books in recent years proves that there is a market for this. In other words, or if you're doing something that's related to vampires, even if your direct competitor is not the Twilight books, you can still bring those up the way, if you can word it correctly, to say that, hey, I might not be competing with the Twilight books, but the fact that those books are so successful is proof that this genre is very popular. And here's what I bring to the table, right? So I don't want to make you scared about talking about those wildly successful books or movies or things like that. But the way that you word it can make a difference, though. And you can actually use this section to your advantage. Sometimes people think that your competitive titles, this is a way that you want to make your competitors look bad. No, not necessarily, because this section, if you word it correctly, can be used to your advantage, because you can say, yeah, here are some titles that I'm competing against. But the fact that they're selling well is proof that this genre is alive and well. And also, here's something that I bring to the table that's unique that the competitors don't. In other words, in this section, you want to emphasize what makes your book unique, right? This is a good selling point to the agents, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So the next section is just marketing and promotion. Now, when we get into project 3, particularly in week 4, we'll talk more about social media marketing. But obviously, for right now, you're welcome to talk about social media marketing. But you can also talk about, there are local radio stations that you could go on to promote the book. If there's interviews with local publications, and you can mention all of that in your marketing and promotion section here. Media and speaking appearances. Now, we had a student a couple months ago, and her book was about some social issue. I think it was domestic violence, right? And as part of her marketing strategy, she even said that she'd be willing to work with some local organization, some charity, some local charity, and she'd be willing to do some speaking appearances about the issue or something like that, in conjunction with, talking about her book. That counts for your marketing and promotion. Also, the thing I do want to emphasize, though, is sometimes people, once again, are a little bit intimidated when they get to this section and they see this thing about media and speaking appearances. And when I just said radio station, some people think, well, there's no way I could get in touch with the radio station and have them interview me about my book. But you would actually be quite surprised. Like, for example, here in Orlando, the Rollins College operates 91.5, and they do stuff like that all the time, for local artists, not just books, but I mean like music artists. They interview people all the time, like local people around here in Orlando. So don't discount that. I mean, some people think that that's not in the realm of possibility, but it could be, and you just don't know it, right? The same thing goes with publications. We're not talking about necessarily the New York Times, right? We're not talking about the Orlando Sentinel even, right? But still, there are a lot of publications, even internet publications, where you can get interviews about your upcoming book, or even taking this outside of team books for a second. I mean, even stuff with your band, for those of you in team music, those of you in film, same thing, right? Also, just one more thing here to mention is this idea of serialization. What I mean by that is, to give you a real life example. In fact, last week we talked about Suzanne's query letter, right? That I showed you. She was the one that was doing a book on yoga, right? And she had her book, and it was on yoga, and what she did as a way to promote it, actually, is she took one of her chapters in that book, just a small chapter in that book, and she was able to get that published in some industry publications, right? Or at least one industry publication, right? So in other words, it appeared in a journal, an academic journal, right? If that applies to you, and you think that that might be a good way to promote your book, in academics, by the way, we see this all the time. In other words, you pick up an academic journal, and a lot of times you'll see an article in there, and it'll even say at the top, this article is an excerpt from a larger publication that comes out later this year or something like that. So this idea of serialization we see all the time with nonfiction books. May not apply to you, but it might. So that might be something that you might want to consider. Okay, now here is another reason why we had these go-to sessions, because once again, students sometimes get to this part right here these parts, and they get a little bit intimidated because they think, well, wait a minute, okay, I don't have a whole book written yet. All I have is kind of an idea. That's okay. Okay. Remember, this can be a little bit hypothetical at this point. So you don't need to know what happens through, like in your 300-page book, but you just need to know a little bit about the content to be able to explain what happens in terms of table of contents, right? So just come up for we'll just say like 10 chapters, right? You don't have to have chapter, even descriptions, or, well, I mean, I don't want to say descriptions, but you don't have to have chapter summaries, but you just need to be able to list chapters 1 through 10. You could have more, you could even have a little bit less if you want, but we'll say chapters 1 through 10, and just a brief description about what happens in that chapter. So what I mean by that is, so for example, let's just say that you're doing a nonfiction book about, let's just take something hypothetical. Let's just take soft drinks in the 20th century, right? Let's just say you're doing a book on soft drinks in the 20th century. Well, you could break that up chronologically, meaning that you could start out with you could start out with chapter 1 as an introduction. Chapter 2 is about soft drinks that were popular in the 1920s. Chapter 3 is soft drinks that were popular in the 1930s. Chapter 4 might be soft drinks that were popular between the two world wars, or something like that, or after World War II to the Korean War, or the next chapter might be something on soft drinks that were popular in 1960s and stuff. So it can be chronological like that, or it could be thematic, right? You could do a whole thing on keeping the same topic. You could do a whole thing on soft drinks that were popular, um, uh, like because of television or something like that, or that were featured on sitcoms. Or you could do something on soft drinks that were featured in movies. You could do something like a whole chapter on Coke, a whole chapter on Pepsi, a whole chapter on Dr. Pepper, a whole chapter on 7-Up. So on and so forth. So you can break the chapters up however you like. It could be chronological, it could be thematic, but just be able to explain in this section what each chapter is and just a brief description about what it's about, okay? And then also sample chapters here. You don't have to do this, okay? I repeat, you don't have to do any sample chapters. You can simply write in sample chapters would go here, period. That's all you have to do for that section. You don't have to include sample chapters. You certainly can if you want to, but you don't have to, okay? But in real life, if you were doing this for real, a lot of times, just so you know, a lot of times the agent is going to want to see a sample of one of your chapters, okay? So that's just a heads up for if you're doing this for real. So that's why this part is included in Project 2, but you don't actually have to do any sample chapters, okay? So let's just show you an example of what this would look like here. Got a couple of them. Let's take a look here at this one. Once again, I took the student's name off, but they would probably have a cover page and their name on it. And this is their overview about what the book is about. It's called It Is What It Is. It's about a character who left the projects in Chicago to travel on the road with Pablo, her boyfriend of 3 years. Pablo was born and raised in Miami. His parents were from Ecuador. At the age of 18, he relocated to Chicago. And so on. Again, we don't have to go through the content here, but that's what the book is about. She talks about the target audience here. She describes it as being all urban fiction book readers. That's perhaps a little broad, but that's okay though, because the next sentence she describes it as usually includes both male and female between the ages of 13 and 30. Okay, that breaks it down a little bit better, right? People between the ages of 13 and 30. And so she explains like who the target audience is, and then about the author, just a little bit about herself here. She talks about competitive titles. Now, you don't have to be this extensive, but she goes through and she lists 5 titles that are competitors, she thinks. And then this is what I'm talking about, though. This is what makes this section really good, because she explains what her book is, or what it does that it brings to the table that the others don't, right? So she explains like what makes her book unique. Then she talks about marketing and promotion here. Technically speaking, when she says Black Literature Magazine, title should be in italics, so it should be like that, and like that. Okay. She talks about media and speaking appearances. The author has a production company that certifies her to speak on media in all avenues. And then she lists various events and things like that. Okay, then she has detailed table of contents. Again, you don't have to be this extensive, but she explains what happens to chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, and so on and so forth, all the way up to chapter 9 in this case. And then, as I said here, sample chapters would go here, right? So she doesn't actually have to do it, but nonetheless, though, she did it anyways, right? She did a sample chapter, part of a chapter 1, right? So she didn't have to do that, but she went ahead and did that, okay? And then to be continued, right? So that's an example of what that would look like. Also, I think I had one more here. Down here. This might be the same one, actually. Oh, okay, no, this is actually for a magazine, okay? So for those of you that are doing a magazine, your template is going to be very much the same. The only things different actually are going to be just a couple of things here. Just the fact that you're not going to really have table of contents necessarily, because every magazine is going to be a little bit different, right? Every publication is going to be a little bit different. It's going to have different articles, but I'll show you how this student got around that, sort of. Okay, so first of all, now in this case, she's talking about her magazine's going to be called Seam. Technically speaking, once again, title should be in italics, so it should be like that, right? And she explains like what the magazine is. It's developed for artists and those interested in the arts, and it would be in digital format, okay? So that's an important point right there, is that she's not going to be releasing this like physical copies. It's going to be in digital format, okay? And so on and so forth. She has, okay, here's one thing that I should point out here. Now, this is a business document. Remember that for this class, you don't have to worry about APA necessarily, but the one thing that you do have to worry about, in fact, maybe the only thing in terms of style to be aware of, is the fact that these are nonetheless business documents. Even if they're not APA or research papers, they still are what we consider business documents. So with that being said, you would avoid using the first person. Instead, you would use the third person. So you see right here where she says, my writing style is eclectic and my fan base includes a wide age range. You want to avoid statements like that. Instead, let's take Derek, who's here. You would say something like, Derek's writing style is eclectic and his fan base. And actually, technically speaking, you would put your last name, not even your first name. So it would be like Smith's or Mr. Smith's, or even if you want to put the full name, Derek Smith's writing style. That's okay too. But you would want to avoid putting, I have written several novels, I have this amount of experience, I have done this, I have done that. So you avoid using the first person, okay? And then she lists like other competitors here. Once again, Bold magazine, you would want to put in italics. She puts it in all caps, but it would be italics. She talks about marketing and promotion using Google AdWords. You guys will learn a lot more about social marketing, social media marketing, and search engine optimization in the next class with Kristen, but you're welcome to use some of that terminology here if you want to as well, like Google AdWords, Google Express, things like that. Media and speaking appearances. She talks about serialization, that she would be, or like each section would be designed to operate as excerpts in other magazines, okay? So you get the idea here. And then instead of having a detailed table of contents, she does this, which is a good way around that, or a good way to kind of to replace that. Basically, in every issue, she has highlights. She has what's a segment called "What's the Word." She has a segment called "On the Calendar," short stories, tips for tots. So that kind of replaces your table of contents for that. So that's an example of how you would go about doing this for those of you that are doing a magazine. Okay. Now next we have those of you, I think we're on the last one now. I think those of you on team music. Okay. Now, which usually, maybe not in this case, but usually most months, it seems like most people are on team music. So, with that being said, just one thing to point out right before we get started here with this is that I know that a lot of you have press kits for real in real life. Now, that's fine if you want to use that part of that for your project two here. But the only thing that you have to understand, though, is that to get the full credit for that, this is the format that you have to follow. Okay, this is the template that you have to follow, right? So just make sure that even if you do have this for real and you have sections that you want to use for this, that's okay. But you have to have at least these sections that are listed here, and we'll go through each of these one by one. Now, the first thing to say, though, not to just contradict myself, but the first thing to say is that for a successful press kit, okay, you don't actually have to have a cover page if you're doing this as an electronic document. What I mean by that is if you're doing this, let's just say that you have an EPK, right? If you have a website, then obviously you're not going to be submitting this. You're not going to have like a cover page. Your cover page would be considered your home page on your website, okay? Also, let me just go back up to here. You actually, for this project, you don't need to have a cover letter. Why? Because your cover letter would be your query letter that you did for project one. So right off the bat here, you can skip this. You don't even have to worry about a cover letter, okay? The cover page, remember, if you're doing like an EPK, if you have a website, that's fine. Then your cover page is going to be considered your home page, right? So just make sure that it looks good. It has your, name and contact information on there. And that said, before we get even further here, let me just answer a question that comes up all the time. Some people will ask, okay, how do we do this project? Like, how do we do the press kit? What format do we do it in? And the answer is there is no set format. Some of you will be doing this in EPK. That's fine. If you have a website, then for your project, all you have to do is send us the link to that. You don't actually have to do anything besides that. You don't have to like put the materials together. You just would send us the link to your website where your EPK is. Some students will do this in Keynote. Some students will do this in even Word. That's okay. Some students will do this as they'll put together like a movie. That's okay. Any format that you want to do this is fine, just as long as you have this information that's on there. Okay. And also, I should point out here that we don't really grade on aesthetics. Too much. I mean, but that being said, try to avoid just blank black and white stuff. I mean, you want to have some kind of aesthetic look to it, but it doesn't have to be perfect. You're not like graphic artists or anything like that. But I mean, just keep in mind that that design does count for at least something, right? Just make it professional looking. That's all. So let's go through here. So the press kit cover, remember, uh, your cover page would be your home page if you're doing an EPK. Your cover page would be your first slide of your Keynote if you're doing this in Keynote, or the first page if you're doing this in Microsoft Word, etc. You would want to have an artist bio page. You would want to list your credentials, of course. Now, the next question that comes up probably is going to be, well, what if I'm a manager and I'm representing like a band or something like that, or another artist? That's okay for this project as well. What you're doing for project two then is that you are doing this as a press kit for them, not yourself, but for them. So in this case, your artist bio page would be the bio of the bands or the artists that you're representing. Okay. Also, that being said, too, if you are representing a band, you would want to have a bio for each band member. Okay, you might want to have like an overall band bio, but in addition to that, you would want to have at least a brief description of everybody that's in the band. Okay. Next, you want to have photos. Now, again, this is another reason why to attend these go-to sessions, because I want to tell you here, I know that it says black and white 8x10s. Uh, if you look down here, that was kind of the old way of doing things. To be honest, don't worry so much about 8x10s or having them in black and white. In fact, actually, it looks like Kim may have gotten rid of the black and white description, but Anyways, that's how it used to be in the old days. You'd have to have 8x10 photos, and they had to be in black and white. Don't worry about that these days. It's not really done the same way. So don't worry about the 8x10. Just as long as you have photos of your band somewhere, right? And just make sure that they're professional looking, right? That they're not like of pictures of the band doing keg stands and things like that, right? So that they're professional looking, but just make sure to have pictures on there. Okay. Next is equipment page. Okay. Make sure to have an equipment page. And this is important because in addition, I know that for these projects, right, we already told you last week that we're not really looking for talent or booking agents. Okay. But that being said, nonetheless, a good agent, even if they're just trying to represent your songwriting, they're still going to require this type of press kit. This is kind of standard throughout the industry. And as part of that standard press kit, one of the sections always is equipment page. And they need to know this because, if in addition to the deals that they're getting for your songs, one of the conditions might be that you have to play live somewhere in order for them to represent you. Or maybe you need to, before they sign you, they need to see you play live, right? So they don't want to get into a situation where it's another Milli Vanilli controversy, right? Where you have people that were phonies that were lip syncing, right? They may need to see you live, okay? So with that being said, and those of you that are musicians or in a band, you already know this. You can't simply say that, oh, well, all we need are guitars and a microphone. No, it doesn't work that way. In fact, those of you in the music industry, of course, if you've ever gone to a concert and you've seen people like Slash from Velvet Revolver or Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, if you ever seen them play, they don't even have the same guitars for each song, right? They switch guitars throughout the concert. They have different guitars, different equipment, and you need to specify what exactly are the guitars, what types of PA systems do you need, what types of other material, even lighting for that matter too. You could talk about lighting descriptions and things like that, but just be very specific in the equipment that you need, right? You don't have to do what they call, like, what do they call those things, runners list or something like that. You don't have to worry about those types of things, but I mean, just have a list of your equipment page, right? Or have a equipment page that lists the specifications that you need, right? Next is booking information. This would be like, your contact information in case they want to get a hold of you. When we say booking information, we're not just talking about booking shows, but I mean booking information to book interviews and things like that. You need to have some type of contact information. Kind of view this as like almost like publicity, right? You need to have some contact information. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, whether it's for not just for booking a show, but maybe for an interview or something like that, they need to have the names of who to contact, right? Next is a demo CD. Now you can do this for real, but like I said, because this can be hypothetical, you don't actually have to have a collection of songs recorded already for this project. You can just simply write demo CD would go here, okay? So demo CD would go here. You can write for that. If you do want to include some links to your songs or videos or something like that, you can. But if you don't have those, that's fine. Next would be a song list. Again, you could be hypothetical here. So if you don't have real songs, or if you don't have a long list of real songs, you can invent some titles here. That's fine. Gig sheet. Once again, you can be hypothetical. Don't exaggerate too much, though. Don't just state that you've sold out the LA Coliseum for the last 2 years and counting or something like that, right? I mean, be somewhat realistic. When we say gig sheet, though, too, it's important to note, though, that we're not just talking about large venues like places like the Amway Center, right? Or Madison Square Garden or things like that. We're talking even about like local coffee shops, right? Or if you played at a bar at open mic night or something like that, that counts. That counts as a gig because that was in front of a live audience, right? So don't just view gig sheets as being like, playing in front of like 20,000 fans or something like that. Okay, next would be newspaper clippings, reviews, things like that. These can be hypothetical, but let me just let you know, though, that when we talk about newspaper clippings, also what you could even put in front of this section too is this. You could even put You could even put testimonials, right? So this could include, by the way, if you have a Facebook fan page, you can put comments from fans on there. That counts, okay? It doesn't have to be newspaper clippings from, again, the New York Times or the Orlando Sentinel or something like that, or the Miami Herald or things like that. It can be, testimonials from fans. Maybe if you have like a fan page, like a Facebook page, or even if you have like an EPK or an official website and you have comments from fans, that counts as a testimonial, okay? Next would be business card. Just show us an example of what your business card would look like. So in other words, if you're doing this in Keynote or Word, just inform us on your document somehow that this is what our business card would look like, and then have, illustration of what the business card looks like, right? Have a slide, in other words, of what the business card would look like. And then next would be the envelope. But once again, since you're doing this digitally, since you're going to be sending this through FSO, obviously you're not going to have a physical envelope, so you don't even have to worry about that. But I mean, for those of you that are going to be doing this in real life, it is true these days that most times these days agents just request email press kits because it's faster. But still, you still have some old school people that still prefer the physical press kits. And even if they don't, it's still a good idea to have physical copies of your press kit anyways, because you never know. Let's say you're playing a gig and you never know, there could be somebody in the audience who's a producer or some talent scout who's going to be looking to sign the next person or next band, and they might just ask for a press kit right on the spot. So it's always a good idea to have these things for real, for physical copies in addition to electronic copies. And if that's the case, and you do have a physical copy, you want to make sure that your envelope looks clean, looks professional. It doesn't have to be terribly fancy, but I mean, make sure that it's professional at least, right? Not like a little letter envelope with everything folded in, right? Okay, so that takes care of the official projects here. Before I show you the press release though, and before we get into the attendance questions, let me just show you an example from a student in the past. Let's just take a look here at, we have a few of them, I think, here. Let's take a look here at this one. I'm trying to think if I might have another one too, or maybe not, but let's take a look here at this one. Let me kind of zoom in to make this a little bit bigger. Now this student, once again, he puts the letter. You don't have to put any kind of letter because that was project one, right? But then he has photos here, pictures. You can see here just looking at this, this looks professional, right? It looks pretty cool, for lack of a better word. It looks pretty cool, right? He's got pictures of himself performing. And if we go through here, he's got all the sections that you need. Now he's got an extensive bio. You don't have to have a bio that's this long, nonetheless, though. But still, he's got a pretty good bio here. He talks about his background. A link to his SoundCloud page with music on it. He's got his equipment list. Notice again what I said here. He's pretty detailed with the equipment that he uses, and very specific, right? He's got his booking information for interviews, to book shows, things like that. He's got a gig sheet, a song list. He's got lyric sheet. These are optional. You don't have to provide lyrics to your songs. He's got press clips. When we say press clips, we're talking about testimonials, right? Comments from fans. He's got an example of his band business card. And in fact, along with this, he actually did send us it's not here on this, in this file here, but he actually did send us a link to some other promotional materials as well. In fact, he's got like he had a copy of an interview that he did with some publication, and he had versions of his songs that he showed us and things like that. So that's an example of a student example here of a press kit here. So that's kind of what we're looking for with that. For those of you on Team Music, I thought I had another example here somewhere. Maybe not. That's okay. I think you guys can kind of get the idea. For those of you that are on team music, you can kind of use that one as a guide here. Okay, the next thing before I get into the attendance questions, though, let me just point this out. This is something that we have in our appendix. Now, this is something that all teams can use. Now, this is totally outside the realm of projects 2 and 3 here. So you don't actually have to include this, but this is one of these things that if you are interested in, if you do this in real life, you guys can put together a press release. Now, I can tell you, a lot of people think that to do a press release, you need to have some kind of affiliation. You need to sign up with a, a PR agency or an advertising agency. Not true. Not true at all. A press release is something that is totally free to do. In other words, you don't have to hire any professional to do it. Some people do, and a lot of agencies make a lot of money off of telling people that, oh, you must sign with us in order to get a press release. But that's not true. Anybody can write a press release, and all you have to do, and we have some descriptions about what a press release is. As it says here, it's a pseudo news story. What that means is it's not 100% a fake news story, but it is something it's a promotional piece. But the key thing, though, with a press release is that you're not trying to make it like it sound like an ad, right? Because first of all, a press release that sounds like an advertisement is not going to be picked up by any publication, first of all, because it's going to make them look bad. They don't want to have news articles that just look like ads, right? Number one. But number two, it doesn't make you look good. It doesn't make your company look good if it's just an ad. A good press release, the key phrase is awareness. That's all you're trying to do with a press release. You're not trying to sell the customer something directly. What you're trying to do is bring awareness about something. So if you have an album that comes out or you have a book that comes out, then what you could do is write a press release just informing the reader that, hey, so and so has a book that's coming out and this is what the book is about, or this is so and so has a band and they're going to be playing at this venue Saturday night, and here's what the band plays. This is their genre, things like that. So the keyword is awareness. You don't just want to kind of pitch your sales necessarily. You don't want to make it sound too much like an ad because the readers don't like that, right? So, but to my point though, a or a press release is totally free to do. All you have to do is send it to a publication. Now, the only catch to that, though, is that first of all, they can decide whether they want to run it. Number one, um, like I said, if it just sounds too much like an ad, they're not going to be interested in running it. Number one, and the other catch is number two, they're pretty much free to edit it however they want to, right? So they might take things out of your press release. They might change some words, but that's okay. That's one of the risks that you have to accept if you do it. Chances are, though, they're not going to make it sound bad. So but that's just something that you have to know, though, is that the decisions that they make in terms of how it is published is totally up to them. But nonetheless, though, a good press release will do all of these things, right? It should bring awareness. You want to have a good headline with the press release. You want, and we have some examples here that list, bad press release headline and a good one. You want to start out with Journalism 101, which is basically in the first paragraph, you want to do the 5 W's and the how, right? Or at least the 5 W's. You want to say, who is this about? What is this about? Where does this take place if you're playing at a show or something like that? Or where can people buy the book, on Amazon.com, whatever. Why this is coming out, or maybe like if you're in a band, why this press release is coming out is because you're touring and all of a sudden this Saturday you're at this venue in this local area, right? So the 5 W's, and so we have some information on this, and not to, again, I don't want to get too much into this because this is just totally optional. You don't have to include this in your marketing plan, but this is just something that you might want to consider. So we have this information, so you're welcome to use this, for project 2 if you want to include that in your marketing strategy, but or even just to hang on to after this class is done, and you can take a look at that if you want to. Okay, so I think that pretty much explains the projects that you have to do for this week, depending on what area you're going into, whether it's film/TV, whether it's music, whether it's books, whether it's games. And I think we've covered everything. But of course, before we get to the attendance questions, as always, just let us know if you're not sure of anything. If you have any questions between now and when this is due, of course, on Sunday, just let us know. And I guess if there are no other questions, we can go right into the attendance questions for this. And just before I get into that, though, let me just remind everybody that, again, make sure that you're contributing to the collaboration assignment, your team's Google Docs. Again, these aren't graded until the end of the month, but as we talked about last week, ideally you want to have one per class. So what that means is for the on-campus students, we have 14 classes, technically speaking. So try to have 14 postings. So for you online students, the same rules would apply. So if there's 14 on-campus classes, it's equivalent to you for online, right? Online material, even though you don't have to actually physically be here. So try to have, we'll say, at minimum, we'll say 12 to 15 postings. Remember, so just make sure to keep doing those. Obviously, they're not graded until the end, but at this point we're in week 2, so you should have at least a few postings, right? And then of course you on-campus students, remember that I think on Saturday you'll have kind of an informal presentation where you just get up there and just show us some of the things that you found so far. So that being said, let's go ahead and we'll get into the attendance questions before we close this out for tonight. And remember, if you came in late, this is being recorded, so we'll put this up on the YouTube page tonight or tomorrow, so you could check that out later. So let's just kind of go through these, right? Okay, so number 1 for the attendance is what piece of content have you chosen for the project? So really easy. It should ideally be the same thing that you did for project 1, right? So in mind, you should have, a film, TV show, a book, a magazine, or a video game, right? So what is your project, basically? So really easy. Number 2, based on your content, what type of material will you be working on for project 2? So this is really easy as well. So for those of you on team games, you're going to be doing a game treatment, not a game design document, because those things, technically speaking, are very, very long. You're just going to be doing a game treatment. Those of you on TV and film, you're going to be doing a TV treatment or a film treatment. Those of you on team music, of course, will be doing a press kit. Yeah, and those of you on team books are going to be doing a book proposal, right? And magazines would be the same thing, a magazine proposal, or magazine/book proposal, whatever you want to call it. So Derek, for music, it's a press kit. So yeah, team music, you're doing a press kit. And remember, I'm sure that everybody's aware, but just so you know, you only have to do one of these projects, right? So those of you on team music, you're only doing a press kit. Those of you on team books, you're only doing a book proposal. Those of you on team film and TV, you're only doing a film and TV treatments. Those of you on team games, you're only doing a game treatments, okay? Okay, number 3, are a certain number of pages required? The answer is no. There's no page minimum or maximum. And the answer to that simply is that in real life, there is no minimum or maximum, right? I mean, I'm sure that if you were looking at the treatments for The Godfather versus the treatment for, Deuce Bigelow, I'm sure the treatment for The Godfather is quite a bit longer and more extensive than Deuce Bigelow, right? So there's no page minimum or maximum. Okay. Number 4, are you required to use APA? The answer is no, you're not. We don't use APA for this class. Okay, number 5, where can you find templates and info on these things? The answer is in the appendix of the textbook, right? What we just looked at, the appendix of the textbook. And number 6, what team have you joined for the Google Doc? assignment, again, the same team that you joined last week, right? So either books, film, music, or games. Yeah. So one of those four. And number 7, what content will you be posting in your team's Google Docs? This is the same. I think this is a repeat question from last time, but again, the answer is anything related to your industry. So it could be related to the assignments in this class that are related to your industry, or it could be just news that's happening in your industry. Number 8 is how many posts should you have to be assured of a good grade? Again, you could just simply put one per class, or you could put the number 14 if you want. And number 9, how often do you need to post? I guess the answer to that would be like once per class or once every other day. Or even, just put like 3 to 4 times a week or something like that. That's fine. And then, is it acceptable to reply to or comment on your teammates' post? And the answer is absolutely yes. So, for example, Derek might have a good post, and then maybe Clovis, or I know that you guys are different. One is online, one's class, but just hypothetically, someone else can come in and post, "Hey, Derek, that was a good post, and did you see this link too, which also relates to what you posted," or something like that. So yes, you definitely can reply or comment on what other people have written. And I think that should do it. And then just another last minute reminder. Again, this is not due this week. This is due next week. But remember that at the end of week 3, remember that the blog post is due and also the mastery journal assignment is due. So we'll go over those a little bit more next week. But just keep in mind that those are coming up. If you haven't done those are just 300 words per each of those. So you can do those in advance if you want to. So I think that's going to be it. Once again, I apologize. We did go a little bit longer than we were thinking here, but that's okay. Thank you guys for attending. If anything comes up, if you do have a good question between now and Sunday before something comes up, if something comes up, just let us know. And we'll again plan for the same time, same place next week, Tuesday, 6 o'clock. And hope everybody has a good rest of the night, good rest of the week. We'll see you guys tomorrow in class for you on campus students. And once again, this is being recorded, so we'll put this up here on the YouTube page later tonight or tomorrow. So, okay, bye bye, everybody.